So let's continue in the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. And last time we got, I think that the very last point of the teaching last time was the chazmal and the understanding of having that experience of silence while speaking, silence, that silent observer while listening. And this all comes forth from pure consciousness being Ein Sof within us, okay? And this is the experience of Ezekiel as he's describing it. And let me go, now I'm going to go to, I'll read a little bit of what we did in 4, and then go on to 5, to verse 5, 6, and 7, I believe. So if you recall, we said, then he looked and beheld, a stormy wind was coming from the north, a great cloud with flashing fire and a brilliance surrounding it. And from it, its mist came Hazmal from the midst of the fire. And from its midst, meaning the midst of Hazmal, a semblance of 4 chayot. This was their appearance. They had the semblance of a man, and 4 faces for each, and 4 wings for each of them. Their legs were a straight leg, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of rounded foot. And they glittered like burnished bronze. And human hands were under their wings, on each of their 4 sides. And their faces and wings were alike on the 4 of them. Joined to one another were their wings. They did not turn as they moved, each one straight ahead. As for the semblance of their faces, the face of a man and the face of a lion to the right of the 4, the face of an ox to the left of the 4, and the face of an eagle to the 4. And as for their faces, their wings extended upward. For each face, 2 joined for each, and 2 covered their bodies. Each one went straight ahead toward wherever there was the spirit to go. They went. They turned not as they went. And as for the appearance of the chayot, their appearance was like fiery coals, burning like the appearance of torches. It manifested itself among the chayot. There was a brilliance to the fire, and from the fire went forth lightning. And the chayot ran to and fro like the appearance of Bazach. So there's a whole lot there, right? But I just want to focus on a general theme and how these words relate to that general theme, which we started last week a bit, called unity and diversity. So if we go back to this, and I'm going to take some things from the Zohar and also the Sefer Yetzirah. We begin with Chazmal coming out of the experience of the flashing fire. And this Chazmal is another experience. And from Chazmal, which we discussed last week, from its mist came the semblance of 4 chayot. So we have this experience of being an observer, the silent observer to whatever is going on the other side. So we can observe ourselves with someone else speaking. We can observe ourselves thinking. This often happens in our meditation. We discussed that at length. So this concept of 2 things happening at the same time, almost like paradox, right? Silence and speaking, follows through now with the chayot. Generally speaking, it's accepted that chayot here and in this point has to do with angels and the angels that are bearing the chariot, okay? But they're very uniquely described. And we could talk forever about all of the descriptions of the Chayot, but I want to focus mainly on the fact that, like in the Sefer Yetzirah, where it starts off telling us that there are 32 paths of Chakmah, and then describes the 32 paths as the 22 letters and the 10 Sephirah. Chakmah is of all the paths, right? So Chakmah, consciousness, in order for this to be significant and real in our life, is related to every one of the letters and every one of the Sephirah, right? So the description of the Chayot, right from the get-go, is that it has the semblance of a man, a human. So it's interesting because basically we have a description of 4 Chayot, 4 angels, but they all have the semblance of the man. Just like the 10 Sephirot all have this experience of Chakmah, even though Chakmah is listed as wisdom and one of the Sephirah. You get that? The same thing is happening here. The semblance of a man is for all 4, right? So all of these things are a man, a human experience, our experience. And that man is the observer, the man in the center facing east. So each of the Chayot have all of the faces. So what did we say the faces were? Face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle, right? So what we're experiencing here, if we put ourselves in the seat of Ezekiel, is experience Chazmal, and out of that experience, he becomes an observer. He's a man, but now he's observing the finest relative in creation. Meaning what? Meaning that we come from this absolute pure consciousness of Ein Sof into the Holy of Holies emanating, right? And we begin to experience that pure silence with order of creation, with sound of creation, with the flavor of creation, being in the 22 letters. And of course, the names, the 4 names, the 4 especially, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and the 10 Sephirah. So he's witnessing this from this place of being able to be an observer in pure silence, no narrative whatsoever, no expectation, just pure, undifferentiated consciousness. And he observes the faces of the beginning of the relative sphere of existence. So when we have this, it describes them in certain ways, right? So if we look at those things just briefly anyway, we could say on the right side, it's described the face of a lion. Now, each one of these faces, so we don't, critically important to understand that everything is one and united, and that's described by their wings. Their wings touch one another, even though they're facing in different directions. So there's 2 points of unity here. The fact that all of them have the semblance of a man. And the other point is that their wings touch, even though they go in opposite directions. So there's a description of unity. But within each experience, as order becomes, on the right side, we have the face of a lion. On the left side, we have the face of an ox. And in my opinion, the dialogue amongst the Kabbalists on this, the most important thing to understand about those two is that the lion is not a domesticated animal. The ox is a domesticated animal. What does that mean to us? That simply means that this sephira that's within us. So there's thousands upon thousands of Merkavahs, right? And they all show up different in different ways. But the basics are the same. So on the right side is the experience of Hakma, and we talked about this in the Sefer Yetzirah class, is not based on the intellect. It's much like a lion. It's very experiential. It experiences hunger and it takes care of the hunger. It protects its children. It's an experiential thing. It's not a domesticated thing. It's a very free and independent, and it is what it is. The ox, which represents Binah on the left side, is domesticated. So it knows, it has knowledge, it has some understanding by which the experience of a non-domesticated animal, like the lion, it now has some understanding. And those two put together, understanding and wisdom, create real knowledge. But the order, Seder Hastil Shiloh, we talked about it last week, comes through the portal of Keter, in through Chakma and Binah. So on the right side, the first, the lion. The left side, the ox. The center column is the face of the man. But the man is the semblance of all of the creatures. Just like Hakma is the semblance of all of the Sephira. Hakma consciousness. So I know that's pretty hard to think about all in just one lesson. It's something that you kind of need to ponder and think about. This is all about the semblance of a man who becomes the observer to creation that includes Hakma, Bina. Another very important point here is the experience is also, and the Zohar points this out, has to do with the double letters, the 7 double letters. And why do I say that? Does anybody remember now still the name of the river where Ezekiel is having this experience? So Chabar, right? Spelled Kaf, Bet, Resh, right? So Chabar is the river, and those are all double letters. And I'll read a little bit from the Zohar. So these are commentaries on Deuteronomy. I don't have a specific verse for you. I copied these so I wouldn't have to carry around so many books. But I wanted to share this with you because I think it's written better than I could explain it. As for their likeness of their faces, they had the face of a man. Rabbi Simon draws a correspondence between the 7 double letters inscribed on the tefillin, the 7 lobes of the lungs, the 7 days of the week, the 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuot, the 7 candles of the candelabra, the 7 planets, the 7 levels of the separate upon which the universe endures. He talks about the 4 countenances of the holy beasts. He emphasizes that Adam is male and female. We learn that there is a correspondence between the 4 countenances and the 4 enshrined names of God, as read in the great, mighty, and awesome El. The human face observes all the creatures. So the human face is the observer, right? The human face observes all the creatures, and all ascend and observe him. Rabbi Siniam says about the secret of the throne, ascending and descending, and how the four countenances of the creatures are depicted, engraved, illuminating, shining, sparkling, and glowing, how they sow the seeds upon the world. So this concept of the observer, the process of observing, and that which is observed, or the object of observation, is happening here to Ezekiel like it can happen to us. Just in this from the midst of the cosmol experience of being able to be in pure silence while we experience activity, whatever it might be, thinking, talking, a vision, or observing. And that's what's going on here. Chabar speaks to what is the positive outcome of this, which is simply that in the double letters, the Kaf is the priestly letter. It represents the sun, and it comes from the west. So it's behind. So Ezekiel, the face of the man, is in the east, facing forward, right? Behind is the Kaf representing the eagle. So the eagle is behind Ezekiel and sitting essentially like a crown. So the wealth of the spiritual wealth of the priesthood and the vision of the eagle in the central column. So now we have the whole thing put together. The four directions, though, as opposed to 7 directions we use when we're meditating with the double letters, or even when we're using the names, especially Yud He, Vav He, in the sealing of the directions. And the reason for that, as explained by the sages, is that there's a Merkavah above and there's a Merkavah below. So what I'm saying is, if you try to just let go of too much intellectualizing here, and I'm sorry if there's a lot, but we can just have this experience. There's always the understanding of within us, there's an above and below. And outside of us, there's an above and below. So when we're meditating with the double letters, we have the dimensions, meaning east, west, north, and south, which is what Ezekiel is seeing with the chayot, and they're running and returning. Okay? This is what Ezekiel is seeing. But absent from that is above and below, 5 and 6, and center, which would be Yod He Vav He in the sealing of the directions, or Tav in the double letters. So if you take the fact that the Merkavah is being witnessed in the below form, there's an above Merkavah. So that covers the dimension of above and below that we use in the double letters. Tav allows because it's in the center and because of the energy of the Tav, it allows the observer to be the governor of that which he observes. Okay, so what am I talking about? I'm saying we're having this cosmol experience. And as we're having this experience, we then can see, feel, experience the thinking of the Sephira as chayot, running and returning. Right side, left side, east, west, north, south. And we know also above and below. When it's brought from the bet in Chabar allows the space for all of this. The Chaf, as I said, is like the crown and the vision of the eagle. And then the Tav would be the seventh center in the double letters. And that allows one to be sort of the master of the domain of these things. That means the seven doubles all have life, death, peace, war. The Resh at the end of Kabbalah is the seed, the potential of all of the energy. And the Tav would be then the seal, the victory that allows us to be the governor of these experiences. So as the witness, we see this expansion of consciousness moving into the relative sphere of existence in like a lion, like an ox, like an eagle. And the observer, that is the man, is one in that silence, observing the objects moving, and they go straight in their direction. So that's another hint that these are the doubles, because the doubles go straight in their direction. When we get to the elementals, they're diagonally directed. It's a lot. I mean, Kaplan has a cube in his book that describes how these directions and how these movements go. So does Carlos Suarez. So if you're interested in those kind of details, those two books explain them in detail and how it goes. But the critical thing that I'm trying to point out is the general theme being described and experienced by Ezekiel: unity in the diversity of creation. So that unity is in that pure silence that's Aleph. And the diversity comes from there into the Sephira, the experience of the Sephira. Now, before I I'll get away from the Zohar, I want to read a little further. All images are comprised in the face of the man. Engraved shapes are formed in them by the engraving of the name, explicitly pronounced to the four directions of the world: east, west, north, and south. So, when I end the meditation, this is what I do with that name, with Yud Hey Vav. And if you've done that level of learning, then there's also what you do in using those letters in that name, in what the Sefer Yetzirah calls the sealing of the directions. But what the important point is, all images of these eagles and lions and such are comprised in the face of the man. So there's ultimately one unity, one witness. All of these are integrated into each other and comprised of each other, so that one should be included in the other in a union. These, the ox, the eagles, the lion, and man, are maintained by the secret of the four-letter engraved name, which are the great and mighty and awful El, which rise to maintain and observe. The face of a man observes all living creatures, and all rise and observe it. They all take form by the engraving in this form, in the secret by means of the name. It is written about them that, as for the likeness of their faces, they had the face of a man. They are all included in this form, and this form encompasses them. So I think that explains, in the best way I know how, this process of observing on the finest level. But we have to understand the chayot running and returning begin at impulses of consciousness. So when we think of them purely as some kind of creature or angel, you can miss the point, because then it seems like something outside of you. The impulses of consciousness that we have as we transcend from the conscious thinking level and go deeper and deeper and deeper into pure consciousness, the running and returning of those thoughts are chayot running and returning. And those that are fed with intention are what is engraving, as described before in the Zohar, right? So we have thoughts running and returning. They run as the Spirit allows them to run, as described by Ezekiel. Spirit causes them to run, and then they return, and run, and they return. That's exactly what's happening in our meditation. When we have thoughts, and then we come back to our letter. We have other thoughts, and we come back to our letter. When we have intentional thoughts, which we don't have in mindlessness meditation, from that space of chazmal, or we could say chakma consciousness, when we have intentional thoughts from that space, after we've done our running and returning as the Spirit goes, that's when carving and engraving begin. Okay? So that's our experience in our meditation. So if we go to the Sefer Yetzirah, it'll say just how it sounds so similar to what Ezekiel's saying. Their appearance, the 10 Sephirot of nothingness. This is chapter 1, verse 6. The 10 Sephirot of nothingness, their vision is like the appearance of lightning. Their limit has no end. His word is in them, is running and returning. They rush to the sayings like a whirlwind, and before his throne they prostrate themselves. So this is what Ezekiel, in this experience he's having, is talking about. Okay? So we touched a little bit about how he's experiencing them and the unity, their wings touching. They're all in the semblance of the observer. This is all coming. And what's also coming in this vision from the north is some judgment and severity, right? And this happens in balancing life. It's the laws of nature. We talked last week about some of the reasons for this happening. But Ezekiel is becoming an observer, and he can communicate what he observes, as he did. That's why we can read it. So he's observing this. He's in a state of acceptance at this point because he's vulnerable, as we discussed. So experience, being that lion on the right that is Hakma, comes from your consciousness in our meditation, not from any narrative or anything that I might say or you might read somewhere. Then it's combined with the understanding to make real knowledge. Okay? So I think that's all I'm going to say about those verses this day, and then we'll get further next time. Are there any questions or thoughts or additions to this?
Bob, I listen to a lot of Krishnamurti, and he is constantly talking about being the observer, but not separating yourself from the observed. It's like a big theme for him. And so when you say that Ezekiel is experiencing the observation of this scene, but then it's the semblance of the man. He's also the man, or we're also the man.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's critically important that we understand that. So these things, another reason why it's trepidatious to teach these things is because they can become like hideouts in our experience in life, right? We say it becomes like, for those of you who are in psychology, there's something called disassociation disorder. And this disassociation disorder, I'm no expert, but what I experience when I talk to some people, especially people on spiritual paths and meditators and such, the mistake is made that they become the observer and even act on becoming the observer without being involved in the object of observation, without understanding that that's the passion and the experience of life. And the impact you make is all important. All of these things are together. So we can be an observer, but we don't use that as a hideout and say, oh, God said you should do this and you should do that. I'm just an observer. I'm just telling you what he said. No, no, no. We are responsible for our impact of everything we say, no matter what name we say it for. And we are involved in the impact of it. We don't want to be hiding out in some cave or by some river and not involved in the world of action, because that's like we said, we go back to the Mishkan, we go back to that tabernacle. We have the inner place that we observe from, the Holy of Holies, and then we have the inner court where we experience through emotion and thought all of these things, and then in the outer court where the sacrifices are made is where all the action takes place. So yeah, thank you, Nora, because that's an important point.